Sonic, you're listening to the voice of HGS.
Ranjani, I would take you shopping in New York. I don't have a good fashion sense.
Reach for the tree rather than the fruit.
I grew up in India where you wouldn't be openly queer.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to Sonic. Yeah, you're used to hearing me but not seeing me, but here I am, Ahalya here, keeping you company on our very first video edition of HGS's podcast series. Thanks so much for being with us today. And not only is this format of communication exciting, but especially the conversation that we've got lined up for all of you today. Now, you know, when we're all sitting at our dinner tables having conversations, sometimes debates, we do often find ourselves talking about the culture, right? And what shapes the culture more often than not is, of course, art. Movies, music, television, OTT, books, you name it, and it's probably impacting your personality. It's impacting the way you look at the world. I know for me, music has shaped a lot of me and my worldviews, right? And the musicians that I love and admire have played a big role in shaping my beliefs and what I strive for. And I think all of us can find those little nuggets, right, in our lives. Today, we're actually going to be talking about that impact, but more specifically in the context of LGBTQ plus representation in storytelling. Lucky for us, we've got an amazing panel. I'm really excited to take this conversation forward with a really diverse set of voices. Joining me on the podcast are Virgil Wong, Solutions Marketing Head, HGS, Ranjani Rangarajan, Deputy General Manager, Internal Communications and DEI, HGS, and finally, Ameya Narvankar, who is a multidisciplinary designer, visual artist, and bookmaker from India. I'm going to talk a little bit more about him and his work through the podcast, but first, let me welcome our guests. I've been talking long enough. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Hello.
Why don't we just say our highs and hellos first. Ameya, thank you so much for being with us. I know, very busy person given all that you're doing all the time.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for you giving me the opportunity to come to your platform and share my experience.
Thank you so much for being here. The pleasure is all ours. Virgil, hello. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hello, it's a pleasure. It's so great to meet you, Mia. I'm really encouraging everyone listening to this podcast to check out his children's book. It really is the most charming, beautiful book I've seen in a long time. Even aside from its cultural significance as a story around an LGBT wedding, it is something that is just such a beautiful, authentic story about family, about love, that I think really appeals to everyone. So I really congratulate you, Mia. I'm so excited to be speaking with you today and sharing this time with you.
Amazing. Ranjani?
Hello. Thank you so much. I'm very excited. I haven't been this excited in a while. And getting to share stage with some beautiful people who I've got the opportunity to work with and interact with. And I know they're very beautiful souls. So yes, let's have at it.
Ameya, just to talk a little bit about your book, why don't we start there and then I'll take the conversation forward to all the questions that I have. There are many. But if you could set the stage for us with the idea of how it came to you, again, given that you are a multidisciplinary designer, right? How was the illustrated book your focus?
So the story Ritu and Chandni essentially is a story of love. It is the story of the celebration of the union between these two women, Ritu and Chandni. And it's told from the point of view of this young girl, Aisha, as she, tries to make sense of all the stigma and resistance, which is a reality, of the sort of discrimination an Indian same-sex wedding would face. And she's just trying to make the sense of it. And it's told from her perspective. The reason I wrote the book stems from my own childhood. I grew up in India where you wouldn't be openly queer. Like, I didn't know what being gay was when I was a kid, because I wasn't even exposed to certain kind of media, right? That you would see nowadays kids growing up with. So I grew up on a staple of Bollywood films and read books which did not feature people like me. I did not see myself being reflected in that media. And it sort of diminished my voice. I felt stifled, I felt repressed. And it definitely affected my confidence and self-esteem to an extent as well. But as I grew up, and this was during my master's, I did my master's at IIT Bombay, and we had folks from all over the country coming. And just being in that sort of, diverse environment helped me come in terms with my own sexuality. It was during those 2 years where I came out publicly, and it was quite fine. Like, everybody was nice and kind and accepting. And that sort of led me to believe that, just being visible and representation can have such a big impact on one individual. So maybe, I can put in those efforts in creating something which can help kids, like maybe the younger version of me, come in terms with their own sexuality as well. So that's what led to the conception of the book. So when I was doing research for my book, I looked at media, especially in Bollywood, and you would see that most of the representations of queer characters was not entirely positive. Like gay characters were added in as a punchline, and that really bothered me. So I tried to go back and figure why is it that how is this homophobia cropping up in these movies? And I realized it's something that we're conditioned right from childhood. And that's why I felt that maybe children's literature is an area that I could focus on. And because I had not grown up with, and that I knew there was a dearth of such media, I put in my effort. And that's what led to the book.
Also, just a bit of a tangent, but I think it's an incredibly powerful thing to be a creator in today's day and age, because you can actually take that narrative into your own hands and craft it, right, for the betterment, honestly, of a lot of people out there who maybe have the chance to come across the art. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the story later on in the podcast. But Virgil, Ranjani, just to get, your initial thoughts about the culture, right? And how it really frames so much of our lives, of our outlook on things. Virgil, do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Absolutely. I think it's something that many people may not be cognizant of. When the culture values items and aspects of family and relationships that aligns with your own identity, it's very seamless, and it seems like, oh, well, what's the big deal? It just seems very normal. But I think in situations like myself and Mia, what you described, that kind of dissonance can be very disruptive. And I think what's really important to think about with this sort of beautiful work that Mia has created is that this isn't something that is kind of introducing something that is necessarily new or novel or different in a way that is kind of influencing in any sort of way that isn't different than what the culture already is pushing out there. My doctoral studies at Columbia University was really about human cognitive development, and you see these young children, they don't have these biases. They're just open. There's no thought that, this family member getting married, like it's just a wonderful thing, and there's nothing else associated with it. But when they start picking up there's certain reactions from certain people, or when they hear about something else in the media, then that's what starts to color and starts to transform their perceptions. So the kind of core values I think we all have as human beings is around love, is around acceptance. But there's something that I think Amaya and other creators are doing to really kind of counter and bring balance to that perspective that, hey, this is something that is the same. Love is love is love is love. And the story, the authenticity, the sense of family is something that is so important. And when you look at a culture that has historically been more conservative, I think that's true worldwide when it comes to this particular issue. But even from my own background, it was just such an anomaly and something that was just so unusual that, at least from my own experiences, just having that context, it was just something that was so foreign. I think with my own family, they just didn't understand what it was. And I think stories like the ones that Amaya is telling is allowing people to have some sort of access point, some kind of perspective into something that they otherwise may not have been privy to. And to me, that's really the core of great art.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot to be said as well for the spirit of joy in these stories, right? Introducing the fact that it can be a very happy thing, as it should be, and that there can be a lot of joy, a lot of love, and a lot of goodness, right, that comes from it. I think that's something that's important to stress as well and introduce, I guess, at an early age. Ranjani, I can see you itching to say something, so I'm handing over the mic to you.
Well, I think what I find interesting about storytelling as an art, or any creative medium for that matter, is how it's a mirror to our society, right? And the more you hear stories and you see stories and you read about what's outside the tip of your nose, the more accepting you become, the more kind you become as an individual. And I think that's and it's especially pertinent in this day and age when we see so much grief around us and we see so much of, biases around us. I think if children at a very young age had representation and they could see more stories of across the spectrum, and like you said, happy stories and stories that are not necessarily cisgender stories, and the idea of a family not being, a cisgender family, and the idea of a family just being of a unit together. I think it would just make for a foundation of care and love and giving, as opposed to, I think as we start off as individuals who want to care, who want to do the right things, but somewhere along the way, something that we don't know scares us. And I think that's true of any one of us, right? And so if you have media coming up to you and telling you that, what, there are stories all around us, and there are, people are all around us, and choices all around us, and all it needs is for you to open up your eyes and open up your mind. I think it's beautiful.
Absolutely. We're all shaking our heads. You can see all three of them shaking their heads in affirmation. I want to take maybe a pause for a second and, ask about tangible examples, right? Maybe memories that we have of the first time we saw a story like this in playing out in real life on the screen, or, in a book, and that the impact that had. I'm sure we all have our own examples of entertainment and media that did that for us, and what it kind of introduced us to. So, Ameya, if you could take it first to tell us, what world opened up for you through what piece of art.
Yeah. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, like there wasn't enough media while growing up. So I did a lot of queer reading of, or rather a queer interpretation of things I saw. So I think Little Mermaid was something that I felt insert myself in as, that whole unrequited love aspect of it, of being able to change yourself for somebody, who you can't attain. So I think that's where I would sort of do that sort of self-insert. Then we had a Bollywood film called Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, which I resonate with the character of Anjali a lot. Just again, that whole aspect of unrequited love. But as I grew up and I was exposed to more media, and especially this was Western media in that sense, because we didn't have a lot of content here.
Right.
And I did a lit review as well for the research for my book. I think one of the children's books that worked amazingly well, and you'll find it on a list of banned books, is And Tango Makes Three. It basically talks about these two male penguins raising a baby chick in, I think, New York's Central Zoo. And that, because it's talking about animals and homosexuality being natural, it ticked off a lot of people, and you could see it being on a list of a lot of banned books even till date. And apart from that, I think in the recent years, been exposed to more books. I have like a stack of books which I could briefly just take you through. So this is Shyam Sarvadurai's Funny Boy. It talks about, it's a coming of age story of a brown person, so that's something I could relate with as well. And it's against the backdrop of the civil war that happened in Sri Lanka. Then next I have Banana Yoshimoto's Kitchen. This is quite an old book. I think it came in 93 maybe, or in the early 90s. And it's a translation of a Japanese book, so some of the terminology might not be politically correct for this day and age, but it includes a transsexual character, and I think they did a really fabulous job with it, given this person has a late in life realization. And that brings me to another character who, again, unpopular opinion, but I really like Cynthia Nixon's Miranda's character and her story arc in The New and Just Like That. I know it was criticized a lot, but people do have late in life realizations as well. And it sort of mirrors her real life too, I feel, to an extent. Then you have Red, White and Royal Blue. I saw the movie before I read the book. It's very optimistic, positive, quite enjoyable. I loved it. And next I have Cobalt Blue. This was a novel in the regional language of India. It was written in Marathi, and it was quite progressive. So I come from a traditional Maharashtrian family and pretty conservative. So for a book to be written in my own language, so essentially this is a book about a brother and sister, and they fall in love with the same man who's their paying guest. I thought it was quite progressive for the time it was written. And lastly, this is a book I read recently. It's called Confessions of the Fox by Jody Rosenberg. It does like a retelling of history. It's a historical fiction. Jack Sheppard was an 18th century thief in London. It reimagines him as a trans man. Yeah, I think these are the recent sort of queer representations that I enjoyed.
That was a really exhaustive list, actually, Ameya.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. I think a lot for, maybe if we haven't read those books for us to get our hands on. Virgil, I want to give you a moment to maybe answer this question as well. What was the first time you remember feeling included and feeling like you could actually relate to something that you watched, and what world did it open up for you?
I'm still waiting. No, I've, there are definitely a lot of influential pieces. I'm trying to think of one particular one, but I think my experience was very similar to Thea's in that popular media typically did not have positive representations or any representation whatsoever that I felt aligned to. I think I have a bit of intersectionality going on where, as a Chinese American growing up in the rural South, there was definitely a cultural juxtaposition with that more visible identifier combined with being part of the LGBTQ plus community, but not acknowledging or not being aware of what that even was. So any sort of representation I kind of clung to very vividly. So I think also, I think books tend to be a little bit more progressive than more conventional or widespread media. So writers like Oscar Wilde, Ian Forster, and Larry Kramer at the time, and Michael Cunningham, and some of these writers who really shaped gay and lesbian literature in such a profound way during such a transformative period from Stonewall through the AIDS crisis and all that has happened since then, I really found to be pivotal, incredible intellects who've really shaped the culture at large, and also shaping such an important voice for so many people who felt voiceless for such a long period of time, for generations. So I found that to be pretty compelling. My other avenue was more in the film media area, especially when it came to New York. Experimental film media was kind of emerging in the 80s and 90s, and being part of that community in the late 90s, filmmakers like Gus Van Sant and Greg Araki, who are pretty established at that point, really created some fascinating depictions of individuals, of characters in often very extreme circumstances that I found so incredibly compelling, and something that to me made it feel like I was part of a community that really pushed the boundaries of really creating art that was interesting, transgressive, and going beyond sort of this normal perception through the circumstances that we lived. And to me, that became very empowering. All these works gave me a thinking of, hey, being part of this community wasn't necessarily a pejorative thing, but something that was incredibly empowering, and something from a creative potential really limitless in many ways. So to me, that collection of all those different exposures to fascinating, amazing, transgressive artists was really life-changing.
Incredible. Virgil, I do also want to dive a little bit deeper into the thought that you just brought up, which is also that, stories are a great way of connecting people, but also introducing people who might be on the other side, or maybe in the dark, right, about a different way of life, or maybe just a different point of view, and how they can navigate something like that. Have you noticed, in your navigation of the culture, really, and so much intersectionality, has there ever been a piece of art that actually helped you have a conversation with someone? Is that something that you could maybe talk about?
Oh, absolutely. I think in popular culture, the sitcom Will and Grace, I think, was really hugely transformative. It was a funny show, and happened to feature two amazing and multiple representations of the LGBTQI plus community, and it was just that level of popularity, that level of relatability with each of these individuals. I think just really allowed folks to say, like, hey, even if they don't know somebody in the community, they feel like they do through these characters. So there's this kind of vicarious connection. So humor, family, great storytelling. I think the storytelling, the narrative aspect, is foundational to who we are. That's how we access and understand and connect with one another. To me, the idea of a wedding in particular, going back to Mia's story, right? It's a celebration of love. There's family, there's food, there's friends, that sense of community. It combines all those elements of a great story, of a great setting, of food, people coming together, sharing those stories, sharing those connections. It's really an amalgamation of all those different components that really drives who we are as human beings. And that's what, to me, is so important about these stories, that it isn't just some peripheral issue or topic. It is something foundational to who we are as human beings, who love and connect to one another, and hopefully can live harmoniously as a community, as a collective humanity that we are, but sometimes fail to acknowledge.
Absolutely. Ameya, would you like to add to that? Sorry, I felt that maybe you wanted to say something there.
Yeah. So even when I started off to write the book, so this book was written before the 2018 judgment in India, where homosexuality itself was illegal. So I knew even from that point of time, just the judicial process being changing wouldn't have the same impact on society. At the same time, there needs to be a social change. And I felt stories are a powerful medium. Stories have the power to change minds. And I think that's why we need to amplify our voices and share these stories to bring about that change. And just I have a similar memory. Like even when I was like struggling with my sexuality, I would just give hints to my family by watching shows like Modern Family together with them, or even Glee for
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. As someone, Glee has been a very integral part of my life growing up as well, and it actually showed me a lot. Ranjani, I think also a good time to talk about the importance of representation in storytelling when it comes to also the allyship conversation, right? Can you talk a little bit about your own experience, maybe learning through art and through storytelling?
Well, I think some of the shows that Virgil and Ameya mentioned, I think there is a sense of relatability to shows like Modern Family and Will and Grace and even Sex and the City, where you're either wanting to be associated or live vicariously through these characters, or even you just want to know these people and they seem so relatable to you. They have the same kind of problems that you have. And so from that lens of it, I found it so interesting that when you take, it's your identity or your sexuality do not make you a person. You still remain a person. You still remain relatable, and you can keep that identity and sexuality aside, and you can, that took me a lot of learning, of course. I think like every other person growing up watching Sex and the City, I wanted a gay best friend and I wanted to go shopping with him, and I thought that was the life. But the fact that there is more to someone than just that there's more to to life than just boozy Sundays, right? Was I think that the intersectionality that Virgil spoke about what brings all of us as individuals is a culmination of all the experiences that we've had and what makes us who we are. So I think from childhood, if we've been brought up with storytelling books and fables, right, which eventually have a moral of the story at the end of it, is what kind of like our own stories make up the values of who we are as individuals, as grown-ups, right? And as I started consuming more and more media and reading more, and it would be a combination of reading something and then probably watching the same thing being made into a show if it's popular, or the other way around. I understood that there's more to people and there's more to their characters than what's being told to us in mainstream. And I'm glad that we have now extremely nuanced characters, extremely well-written characters, and it really is a breath of fresh air.
Ranjani, I would take you shopping in New York. I don't have a good fashion sense, so I wouldn't trust my judgment. But we can hit Fifth Avenue and East Village, West Village, and have a ball.
Fantastic. I love that. Absolutely.
Amazing. I think sometimes, the best way to also have conversations is to put yourself in the shoes of a child. And lucky for us, Ameya, you've written a children's book. So this makes my question a very easy segue. But if, an 8-year-old came up to each of you, right, and said, I'm curious about what I've seen. Can you help me understand this better? Amaya, what is the first thing you're probably going to show that child? Is it going to be a book or a show or a movie? And if so, which one is it going to be?
I would choose a picture book. Yeah, I feel picture books is like the earliest window to the wider world for kids, just to introduce them to new communities, new cultures. I think it's a fabulous medium.
And lucky for you, you have one.
Yeah, and often the case, the protagonists of children's book are children themselves, which makes it easier for them to place themselves in those shoes.
Okay, fantastic. Virgil, what about you?
Oh, I would give them Amia's book. I think that would be the best best route. Yeah, I think so much of it is also the kind of social modeling, like that. I don't feel like I go out and preach to children or tell people to watch this or watch that. I'm really about trying to be a positive model, hopefully, of who I want to be, of who I think could be a positive contributing member to society. I think having that sort of picture, and that I happen to be gay as well, just is, I think, my way of kind of pushing that forward without telling people what to do or what to think. And I think especially with children who are so impressionable, and given that it is still a very sensitive topic for many individuals, I think you have to be very careful in those types of conversations. So something like a book, as Mia said, is a way for them to kind of gather information without feeling exposed or vulnerable or threatened in any sort of way. So I think just kind of keeping it a very kind of safe, open area where they can really explore, ask questions. And I think for LGBTQ plus youth, having that sort of reflection of their identity. So they may not see it in one book, but they may see it in another. So it's really important to kind of explore and look at all those possibilities out there. So the idea of having that accessibility to a wide breadth of perspectives, of course, geared toward children, is very important. And that affirmation, right, reducing those feelings of isolation that I certainly felt as a child growing up, validating the experiences and my thoughts, right, that what I'm thinking and feeling is okay. I think that's so important. And again, those positive role models to resemble your own life and your own aspirations, just to provide that, make those available to a child, I think is so crucial. And the fact that we're denying that in so many cases because of our own insecurities or our own hangups is such a disservice to caring for and doing what's best for that child.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. Ranjani?
Well, I'm gonna, reach for the tree rather than the fruit. I'm gonna try and get to the parents first, I think. Simply because I don't think these are conversations that you can have in isolation with the children themselves, or you may be in trouble with the parents, right? So, like Virgil and Amaya, I think books are a great medium. But then I would have a conversation with the parents. Is it okay if I give the child something like this, which talks about, not necessarily, cisgender relationships, but it's even about, like identity and, not necessarily choosing blue versus pink, but can we, the colors of spectrum of yours are yours, you can choose whatever you want to be. So I think I would go the parent route first, and then, depending, and I would make them read that as well, because I think it's very important for us to, if you're preaching something else and then the parents are preaching something else, then it just causes confusion. So maybe get a buy-in, and then tell the child that it's perfectly normal, it's perfectly, it's a beautiful thing to question everything and people's opinions, because I also feel that our parents are so instrumental in making us who we are. So if they're teaching us the right things, then perhaps they grow up in a lot more secure about themselves. Know what I mean?
I think that's such a hugely important point. I feel like a lot of my friends who are parents have questions, and they're like, how do I, I got to ask this question and I don't know how to respond.
Right.
Like what are some resources? Absolutely, going through the parent is crucial, right? That's we're not going out just handing out books to random kids on the street. Like this is really something that involves a conversation, involves going through and understanding what might be useful for the parent. And from my scenario, I feel like it's always somebody reaching out and you're kind of offering whatever help, support, resources, or perspective. Again, because I'm gay and Asian doesn't mean I'm the authority on all things gay and Asian.
Right.
It's simply my own perspective, and also just me being a friend and supporting in many ways of what perspectives may be useful to my friend and their questions. I'm not a
Right.
parent, but I know it's a very challenging relationship and very challenging responsibility. So just being part of that community to support the parents, supporting that family is, I think, the most important role for us to occupy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to add that I very unpopular with my friends' children because all I do is give them good books and they want toys. I'm very unpopular, but it is what it is.
I also want
Sorry.
to add from a publishing perspective. So a lot of the publishers now are encouraging adding back of the book content to help support and drive the conversation further. So once the kid and the parent have read the book together, the kid might have follow-up questions. The publishers are encouraging authors to also write further back of the book content to drive that conversation further. I think that's quite important because parents and educators are the gatekeepers to children in these diverse books. I think that's a great area to invest in for authors.
Yeah, absolutely. I think today's conversation has really emphasized the idea that storytelling can, of course, spark discussions, but it's also a great way to bring people together. And I think that is an extremely powerful tool because, one thing that stood out from all three of your perspectives today is that all of us, right, are part of this world feeling the same things at a very human level, and just to be able to level with each other at some point, art really drives that leveling, and I think it's super important. And it's been a pleasure actually to have a very, in some sense, diverse meeting of minds, but at the same time, very cohesive conversation. As a podcaster, it's always a pleasure. Ameya, also, if I could maybe request you to read, the last part where let's not pass on the fear of log kya kahenge to future generations. If we could end the podcast, I think it would be really beautiful.
Perhaps translate as well.
Yeah. So log kya kahenge essentially means what would society / people would say or think. And that's a very common phrase that you would hear in an Indian household. And it has killed many a dream. Have the fear of being judged. And definitely, I think even when I was trying to come out, I did have that fear as well of being singled out, of being judged. But yes, did go ahead. So I'll just read out the last bit of from the book. To my fellow Desis, let us not pass on the fear of log kya kahenge to future generations. Instead, let us inspire our children to stand up for what is passionate and just.
Incredible. It's a silent applause because it's a podcast, but it's definitely worth the applause.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Thanks, Ahalya. Thanks, Ameya. Thanks, Virgil.
Thank you.
Yay. I've got a big smile on my face because that is gorgeous. I remember reading that for the first time thinking, wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much once again, all three of you, for being here today. Everyone, that's a wrap on this episode of Sonic. We'll be with you very soon with what I'm sure is going to be a great conversation. But for now, soak up all of this goodness and I'll catch you very, very soon. Bye-bye.
Sonic, you're listening to the voice of HGS.